Hello team and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. It's Ukraine War Update Extra video, giving you extra tidbits and nuggets to get your teeth into to give you a greater understanding of the war in Ukraine. And it is a bit of a smorgasbord as per normal in terms of what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to start with referring to my first video this morning that showed you a montage of drone losses from Magyar, who is in charge of a famous unit of drone operators. But he here says, well, that 300 Russian first-person view drones were landed or destroyed by Ukrainian forces, and the footage is from Russian FPV drones that were downed by Ukrainian electronic warfare systems. One presumes that are under the purview of Magyar, or I don't know, but nonetheless, this is the footage. I'm not going to show all of it to you, but just to give you an understanding of what this is. So you've got drones here flying, including ones flying over the water that then suddenly you lose control of, and then that's the end of that drone. See you later. Falls in the water. A couple of things to note of this footage, and there's lots of different bits of footage of different drones being lost. The question for me is 300, is that good or bad? Is that a lot? I have no frame of reference because I don't know how long this was over, what time period this concerned, but also how far geographically was this footage concerned with? Like, was this just Magyar's unit in one particular area over 2 weeks? Was this the whole front line over the whole war? You know, so in other words, 300 effectively becomes a meaningless number without those variables detailed. But I asked you guys, being somewhat ignorant myself of these things, for expertise and information from you in the threads about how this happens. How are they taken out of the sky? Are you just going to be... I mean, I know that there are different bits of kit that you can use. You can use stuff that takes out drones and other activity in a certain radius of it. You can have guns that you kind of fire in a direction of the drone, so on and so forth. There are lots of ways of doing this, but also how they got hold of footage of Russian drones, supposedly Russian drones, especially if they are falling in the water. Like, do they retrieve these bits of kit and get the footage of them directly? Is there some way of intercepting the footage, so on and so forth? So a few questions, and you guys obliged very well. I'm just going to read you two quotes here. This first one, this comment was from Nakmail, so thank you for this. Drones are controlled by electromagnetic radiation. Generally, this is reasonably high frequency radiation that, or you do not have enough bandwidth capacity to transfer control information, video, etc. It's similar to how wireless internet works in your own house. Jamming is the most effective form of electronic warfare, as it does not require any knowledge other than the working frequency of the drone control signals. For this, you flood the frequency ranges used with signals that drowns out the control signals. This is what signal to noise ratio is all about. Methods for doing this come in both wide range emitter types and targeted emitter types. I presume, yeah, you would have ones, you could have a hub that just emits a wide range, and anything in that area that's within that range will get knocked out, or you can target a very particular area, or you can target with a particular range, radio wave range. Now, this is, I presume, why when there were all these drone attacks on Moscow and they started getting out all the electronic warfare countermeasures and placing these machines around Moscow, but also giving policemen those big anti-drone sort of guns that they were complaining about, they're more dangerous to their own testicles than they were to the drones. When people were driving around Moscow at that time, some months back, they started losing their sat nav in their cars, going mad, and the phones and stuff. So it interferes with, as mentioned here, that kind of Wi-Fi interactivity and internet and whatnot. One presumes as well. Anyway, to continue. What's interesting here is that the drones fall out of the sky. Many drone types have programming that does things like return home on loss of control signal. I'm unsure whether this type of functionality is used in the theatre of war, as being able to send a drone back to where it came from would obviously highlight where its users are, hence making a nice artillery target. This is some of the stuff we'll have to see about once the war is over and the tactics employed become more public. On the falling out of the sky part, I'm not exactly sure what's going on here. Maybe the drones just fall out of the sky if no control signal, but I find this unlikely, as it would mean you always have a dead drone if your signal gets interrupted momentarily. There are stories about drone capture, so this also suggests that the control systems are so generic they can be hijacked, but it also suggests there's no strong encryption on the video signals, otherwise this would not be possible. You could technically target the motors, as they're basically antennas being long coils of wire, but it would seem to me that this would require ridiculously powerful transmitters to have any sort of decent effect. So I've kind of ruled it out in my mind. I also get the feeling that the motor casing would provide at least some sort of Faraday cage effect to limit any ingress of electromagnetic radiation, as they would be designed not to cause electromagnetic interference with their own radiation output. There are huge amounts of regulation on this, but I'm just fishing on this subject and have no hard data. Well, thank you very much. I mean, I still don't understand a large proportion of what you're saying, because I'm not an expert in these matters, but hopefully that helps some people. And then, kind of related to what he's saying, and what I was also asking, so this is Houseman Visuals, says the feed on these first-person view drones is analog. You can simply set up a receiver that scans all channels and watch. So the pilot sees the feed to control it, but any other receiver in range can see it too. Even more so if it flies towards you, so you don't need to recover it. In fact, the interferences you see point to the fact that was a copy of the live feed. If it would be recorded on board, there wouldn't be any interference on the video. This is a really good point. Not only about the interference, but also generally the quality of footage means that it's being recorded from the screen and not taken from the device itself. So as you can see here, the resolution is very poor. As this one of many, you can see, you know, it's blurred. It's not very good. I know this is a recording of a screen, but still, nonetheless, again, you can see that the quality is very poor and it gets interference. And that means, because that's interference, it's a really good point, this, because that's interference, that is not onboard footage. So this drone is almost certainly lost. All these drones are almost certainly lost. The recording is being intercepted by the Ukrainians. It's not from the Russian controller that would see this and be able to control the drone. You're just intercepting the feed. Now, we not only know that this, because of the quality and the interference, that this is an intercepted video, but sometimes you get Ukrainians and Russians providing feeds that are poor quality like this, and that are screen recordings. And the reason they sometimes do that is because they lose the drone themselves. So particularly first-person view drones that are loitering munition, right? They're kamikaze drones. They're one way. You send them out, you're going to lose them. So you're not going to get the memory card. You're not going to get the onboard storage of that video footage. So that's why it's recorded back where you're looking at it, and that lowers the quality. It's a received message that will be, I don't know, compressed or whatever. It'll be a poor cousin of the original feed. But even on drones that you're expecting to get back, like IED, drones that drop IEDs, quite often those drones will not make it back. They'll get shot out the sky, they might get too windy, and they fall out the sky, or whatever, they malfunction, you just lose them. There's a fairly hefty proportion, one would imagine, of those kind of drones that you are trying to get back that you don't get back. And the footage you therefore put out to social media from those drones, if you're going to release that footage, will be the recording from your monitor, not from the drone, because you haven't got it back. Yeah. So anyway, that I thought was worth adding in as well. But thank you very much for those two for providing some extra information. Really do appreciate that. Right, going on to a bit of random footage here. Here is some camouflage from Dnipro River. Here is some very loud music on board a boat in the Dnipro River. So you have a quiet, serene movement now that I've turned that music off. So you can see this boat is basically disguising itself as a really big bush. And to be honest, there's every chance that that could escape being spotted by a drone dropping that's trying to drop IDs on troops or targets if that was sitting fairly well nestled into the bank. So yeah, there you go. You would expect disguise to be used quite a bit here. Right, we're going to do a thread, fairly long thread here on a self-propelled not a self-propelled howitzer, a self-propelled mortar that is used by the Russians. Not the Tulip one, which is a really big 240mm mortar, which I don't know if he's done a thread on this, but this is Chung Tzu, who does threads on these, it's a bit like Thomas Tyner used to do before he got completely absorbed in the Israel-Palestine conflict and has gone off on one on that conflict and spends very little time talking about what's going on in Ukraine, but he used to do kind of threads like this. So anyway, for those who are interested in this, let's talk about it. So the Soviet airborne forces, the reason why I think it's quite interesting because it also dips into ideas of what airborne forces do and what their needs are. So the Soviet Airborne Force, the VDV, have a long history of interest in self-propelled guns, and we're going to look at the Nona-S self-propelled mortar. In the 1950s and 60s, they employed the ASU-57 and the SU-85 self-propelled guns. These were primarily anti-tank direct fire weapons. Direct fire means that you are looking at what you're firing at and you can see it and you're going to shoot directly at it. Indirect fire is exactly what a mortar does, which is I can't see it and I'm going to fire in such a way that it lands on my target, but I don't know where my target is, or I can see it, but it's still, you know, going to be up and down. I'm not firing directly at it. There's this idea that it's indirect. These are, look, if you play World of Tanks, these are your tank destroyers. So these are tanks designed to destroy other tanks, as opposed to support maneuvers and do other jobs. As a side note, while it is commonly known as an ASU-85 in the West, it's actually a Su-85 in all the manuals anyway. That's what that tank is. Doesn't really matter there. At the same time, indirect fire support was still provided by the towed weapons like the 122mm D30 howitzer or self-propelled 85mm SD44 of the VDV's artillery units. These imposed serious limitations on mobility as well as lacked the protection of self-propelled guns. What you have as well, you've got the need of VDV units, paratroopers. Paratroopers are really mobile, right? They're dropping out planes. So whatever you have to support paratroop regiments or airborne regiments needs to be able to be kind of dropped out of a plane or very mobile at the very least, right? And this is why when we've seen the VDV on the front lines and when we've seen Marines on the front lines, they don't have big mechanized equipment support, and so they're not really ideal for doing a lot of the jobs that sometimes they are given. We've seen this in the Velika Novosilka salient for the Marines used by the Ukrainians, and they've been moved down to Dnipro River, but we saw this a lot with the Marines, the 155th and the 40th in Naval Infantry Brigades in Vuhledar when they were absolutely hammered and reconstituted something like 9 times, but they were the wrong kind of people to be using for that kind of job, right? So these are light elite units used for like going in, doing some crack work and then getting out, not for like plodding on, having huge amounts of artillery to support them, because they won't have that artillery. They'll have mortar crews much more frequently for that same reason. So in 1964, Colonel General Vasily Margalov, commander of the VDV, advocated for the VDV's mechanization in order to act as a highly mobile force that could quickly secure gains following Soviet nuclear strikes on NATO territory. So they did need some kind of mechanized capability. This was what led, and this is a really interesting bit of footage here.
Затем происходило открытие основных парашютов.
Probably don't need to hear that. This is, as you can see, a BMP-1 dropped out of a plane with a bunch of parachutes attached to it and falls gently to the ground. Bang. Needs some pretty good suspension, one would think. So, as it says here, this was what led to the development of the BMD-1 airborne infantry fighting vehicle. It enabled a quantum leap for the paratroopers' post-drop mobility, and this in turn led to a need for a suitably mobile indirect fire support vehicles. So, in other words, as technology and capability moved on, and they recognized the need for the VDV to have this mechanized support, or the ability to drive around and move around using an infantry fighting vehicle, they could get planes that were big enough, and they could drop them out of planes with massive parachutes attached to them and put things in place so they didn't break when they hit the ground. Experiments were made using the 2S1 Godzilla or Grozdika SPA for airborne landings. These proved successful, but in the interests of the commonality, the VDV preferred a platform based on the BMD-1. The 2S2 Flyker or Violet combined the BMD-1 with a Grozdika's 122mm gun, but the lightweight chassis could not withstand the recoil forces. So you've got a really big gun on that. As it recoils, it's just going to break apart because it just can't withstand such a big gun on such a light chassis. There was another project known as a Landish, the Lily of the Valley, using a 120mm mortar, of which little is known. So they all generally get named after these flowers. The Tulip is that big 240mm mortar, self-propelled mortar, the bigger version, if you like, the bigger brother of this Nona-S. And around the same time, the Soviets became interested in developing universal weapons that combined the properties of mortars and light howitzers. They were not the only ones, of course, for the Americans dabbled with the XM-70 Maritsa II. Soviet interest in this period mostly lay in combining 120mm mortars with recoilless rifles. They were also influenced by the French MO 120RT61 rifle mortar. Now, the French still the French have provided these to the Ukrainians, and what's significant about these are rifled. So if you remember, I did a whole thread on these ages back. Rifled bores have the rifling down it, which you would have things on the shell that often made of copper or whatever that squeeze into the rifling grooves that then allow the shell or mortar bomb to be rotated really quickly, and the rotation is what gives it stability in the air. Like when you fire a rifle, like a gun, like a rifle, it's called a rifle because of the barrel rifling in the barrel, and that bullet spins in the air, and that's what gives it stability as it goes through the air. Otherwise it's just going to go all over the place. Or you can have smooth bore, but in order to have smooth bore, so your barrels are smooth, you need something to stabilize the shell or the bomb. So you attach fins to it, and those fins are what gives it stability. But as far as I understand it, the rifling will give you slightly longer range, possibly, or at least for this mortar, the French mortar, there is a longer range. So anyway, it does not fire fin stabilized bombs like traditional smoothbore mortars, but rifled shells. And we'll get an idea. Is it here or? Yeah, so you see those striations around that shell, that they will fit into the grooves, if you like, and that will cause it to rotate through the air. At least that's how I understand it. I'm probably wrong. Soviet intelligence was able to acquire some MO 120RT61 shells for testing, and they were suitably impressed by its benefits over traditional fin-stabilized smoothbore mortar bombs. So the Soviets developed their own rifled mortar shells. So you can see them here, with each of them with these bits that would squash into the rifling. By 1974. T.S. Toshma, whatever, had been working on a 120mm breech-loaded rifle mortar under the codename Lily, following the failure of the Flyker. They Fialka, sorry, Fialka. God, letters, they look so similar. They suggested mounting this weapon on it instead. Some political shenanigans follow under the leadership of the Avenir Novozhilov, and in collaboration with the Motovelika artillery factory, the Nona-D was completed in 1974. It was now based on the BTR-D airborne APC chassis, but still needed Fialka's superstructure. So the chassis obviously had been proven to be that you can drop it out of a plane and it will be all right, so let's put a mortar on there. Nona-D was really more of a proof of concept, but its success allowed the Nona project development to be formally authorized in 76 and the first prototype completed in 77. And after testing, the Nona-S was accepted into service in 1981 with a GRAU index to S9. The heart of the Nona-S is its breech-loaded 122mm 2A51. It is mounted on a turret with a maximum elevation of 80 degrees. So you think 90 degrees is completely upwards, 80 degrees is going to be there, which will give you, well, the ability to do different things if you, depending on what you want out of it, I guess, allowing it to function as a mortar to drop shells almost vertically. So the more vertical you can fire something, the more vertical it can come down. So if you need to get into, say, a ravine or in between some buildings or something like that, then you need something to go up and come almost vertically down. And you can't do that with a tank, you can't do that with artillery, where artillery will have a trajectory like that. If you've got like some vehicles parked in an alleyway or something, then you know that's not really going to work as well, whereas an almost vertical mortar will be able to help more. The turret has limited manual traverse of 35 degrees each side, so that's like a 75 degree total, I presume, movements. Okay, the weapon is loaded manually. The Nona-S, or I didn't show you actually the other pictures there, which I think might be useful to see. So that is what the Nona-S broadly looks like, and you can see it's mounted on a sort of not so much a tank, but a BMD chassis there. I think that's pretty obvious. The weapon is loaded manually. The Nona-S carries up to 25 rounds on board. Now, 25 rounds is not a huge amount there. I don't know why that goes back like that. It's not a huge amount there. But then if you think of a mortar team, they have to carry their rounds around with them. So they're going to have to be fairly close to their ammo dump as it is. So, you know, 25 is better than that, but it's not a massive amount. Ammunition can also be passed from outside via the hatch and the slide, like here. So let's have a look at that in action. Is the music down? Yep, good. So let's have a look to see what happens here. So there they are, writing things on paper. Marvelous. And pass down into the hatch. Thank you very much. Down a slider. So you can have a big ammo store nearby and still be able to relatively quickly reload it manually and fire it off. Okay, the maximum rate of fire is rated at 10 rounds per minute. So if you think if they've got 25 shells or bombs, mortar bombs on board, then 10 rounds a minute means that in 2.5 minutes you've used up, if you're firing at maximum rate, all of your rounds. Although it reduces to 4 to 6 when shooting heat in aimed direct fire mode, so you can fire them directly rather than indirectly. It takes no more than 30 seconds to switch between traveling and the firing configuration, so you can shoot and scoot fairly quickly here. The primary ammunition type for the 2A51 is the 19 kilogram 3OF49 rifled high explosive fragmentation bomb with 4.9 kilograms of A92 explosive, and 2A51 can throw it at a maximum muzzle velocity of 367 meters per second out to 8.8 kilometers. So that's an all right range for a mortar, really. However, it can also use older Soviet 120mm smoothbore ammo as well. So it can use, so this has rifling on there, with a little bit of fin stabilization. But also this one here doesn't have any rifling at all. This would be fired out by smoothbore mortar and is stabilized by those kind of fins at the end. And the Nona-S can fire both types of round. To put this into perspective, 30F7, the standard 122mm D30 high explosive fragmentation shell has a bit under 3 kilograms of explosive, while the 152mm high explosive fragmentation generally has 6 or 7 kilograms, and this has 4.9 kilograms. So you can pack a bit of a punch. So it sits in, I guess, in the middle of those two there. Other types are introduced with the Nona-S include a cluster, heat, wrap, all these different types of projectiles that can be fired. You can see the rifling at the bottom there. So it has different uses. You can use these different things to achieve different aims. Chassis is based on the BTRD Airborne APC, which is in turn based on the BMD-1, but with an extra road wheel. It features a 240 horsepower 5D20 engine for up to 60 kilometers per hour on roads. 2 water jets can propel it up to 9 kilometers per hour in water, so usefully amphibious as well. Like all members of the BMD family, it has an adjustable hydro-pneumatic suspension. This allows it to be packed more compactly from airdrops, as well as to adjust the height of the vehicle to suit varying positions as needed. Yeah, a number of different vehicles have this, which is the ability, I think the AMX, the French AMX has that as well. That light tank on wheels has the ability to pneumatically adjust some of its wheels, so actually it can adjust the trajectory of the barrel, so it can actually fire higher as it lowers itself at the back, and this obviously has the ability to do similar things. Armor is nothing to speak of. 15mm of rolled aluminium alloy is not going to do too much against anything beyond rifle bullets, so it is weak, but it then is not really designed to come up against direct fire from the enemy so much. In Soviet times, the Nona-S was used exclusively by the VDV. The same more or less remains true for the successor states, and both Ukraine and Russia's airborne forces still operate them. Ukraine is known to have inherited around 45 Nona-S, of which 3 are known to have been sold to China prior to 2014. At the time the war began, they were used exclusively by the 25th Airborne Brigade, who had 36. And there are some of them being used. Due to the fact that the vehicles were not made in Ukraine, the Ukrainians have had problems maintaining them, especially the complex hydro-pneumatic suspension. However, they are still employed to this day. A few, at least 3, were lost during the 2014 and 15 fighting. And there we have some pictures there. The Russian VDV remains the biggest user of the Nona-S. It serves the same role as it once did in the Soviet VVS. I don't know exactly how many they have, says Chung Tzu. As the VDV has been some of the most hard-committed units in the ongoing Russian invasion, the Nona-S fleet has also suffered fairly notable losses. The short range of the Nona-S also makes it potentially vulnerable to counter-battery assets. I mean, that's a thing with all of these all of these self-propelled that's important to note about all of these self-propelled mortars, is that mortars will not have the range that howitzers have because of the trajectory of what they fire and their mechanisms and everything. So they will be much more vulnerable to being attacked. So if you remember around Klishchivka, to the south of Bakhmut, as the Ukrainians were kind of taking over Klishchivka, they were hammering a bunch of Nonas. There was one day the Russians lost about 8 of these, 9 of these I think it might be, or at least footage came out, and 9 of these being taken out over a couple of days maybe in the Klishchivka area. So when it does get a bit hairy and you start being on the defensive and you've got these bits of equipment in place, then they are going to be vulnerable to be hit because they are that close to the front line. It's just the nature of the kind of weapons they are, I guess. For all its weaknesses, the Nona-S packs quite a punch in a light mobile package, and judging by the existence of the Nona-SVK and other 120mm mortar platforms, the Nona-S will probably remain in use for the foreseeable future. Sometimes you can laugh at old weapons, but if they kind of do the trick, which is firing an explosive round into the air to hit a target, then, you know, they are still going to be useful. Right, hopefully that was of interest to people. Right, moving on. Just a little note about Jackson Hinkle, who's effectively a Russian propagandist, American chap. He had a Pekka Kallioniemi thread of Vacnic soup on him, but then Pekka came out and said that actually something else, because interestingly Jackson Hinkle has just been banned on Discord, I think, because he violates disinformation or propaganda or information rules. He's saying an awful lot about Israel and Palestine. He's going very hard on support for Palestine in his positioning to align with kind of Russia and anti-America. He's basically become a super anti-American American. He's a shill for the Kremlin. So partly due to this, his account on X or Twitter has become massive. As of today, he has close to 2 million followers and allegedly over 7,000 subscribers. By my estimates, he's currently making anything between $20,000 and $30,000 a month on this platform alone. So from Twitter, he's getting that much money a month from basically saying the reactionary, contrarian stuff he does that feeds the algorithm so much better than people's just speaking fairly calm truths. Anyway, that Hinkle 24 can make that amount of money for spreading hostile war propaganda, says Edward Hunter Christie, while experts of integrity with PhDs, books, and 10, 20, 30 years of real experience makes a fraction of what he makes, tells us a lot about the world Musk lives in. Yeah, I mean, there is this talk about how Musk has tried to monetize Twitter a lot more, not just by giving out the blue ticks, but also by monetizing in other ways associated with that. But when you look at who he rolled that out to initially, it was just a particularly politically and politically, geopolitically aligned bunch of people. All the people who's listening as that were making money were all in the same kind of thinking space. And it was highly controversial. A lot of people were going, he only kind of gave the ability initially to a certain type of people to monetize their accounts. It was all very, very dubious. Anyway, I just thought I'd spread that bit of info your way. Right, I wanted to go back to just give you, because I want to do this morning, but I knew it would have taken too long. So it's ripe for an extra video. This is the whole Tommy Tuberville thing where he's holding up 350 promotions. One human being in the Senate, in the minority party in the Senate, is holding up the promotion of 350 military promotions for the US military. Absolutely incredible. I would be incensed if I was American. But anyway, his own party colleagues are the ones who are now getting to a point where they're really pissed off with him. So here we have just another, I'm dipping into another video. Again, it's actually by Midas Touch, but it's not really that. I'm actually dipping into what I want to know is what his colleagues are saying.
We have done the best that we can to honor the request of a fellow senator that these nominations be brought to the floor and voted on individually. And
can I just explain what she's talking about there? So what would normally happen is that the Senate would just rubber stamp the promotions en masse, right? You say, okay, here's 100 military people that need promoting. Okay, let's go through them all. Yep, don't have any problem with this. Yeah, okay, promotion. And they all get promoted. Tommy Tuberville came along and then pulled out this kind of ruling where he said, no, I'm not going to allow that. Because of this thing on abortion, and he's saying we're not going to fund abortion, but actually it wasn't funding abortion, it was funding travel when you were being forced to move out of state by the army or Marines or whoever, you're right, now you've been positioned over here and you want to go and get reproductive health care over there, we'll pay for your travel because we're the ones who have moved you out of state and actually it's illegal in that state or whatever the situation. So that was a ruling, but he's kind of misinterpreting that. I think he's being disingenuous about that and saying it's about paying for abortion. It's not. But he said, so Tuberville said, so you can do them all individually if you want and vote them through that way. And he's then stopping that from happening too. So she said, look, like I hold people to their word and that's fine. But you are not holding to your word because you are now individually stopping these promotions. So that's what her point is here.
Individually. And I really respect men of their word. I do not respect men who do not honor their word.
No matter whether you believe it or not, Senator Tuberville, this is doing great damage to our military. I don't say that lightly. If this is the norm, who the hell wants to serve in the military when your promotion can be canned based on something you had nothing to do with?
It's simply...
That's a really good point. Imagine you at home, any of you, whether you're Republican, Democrat, whatever, or not even American, right? Imagine you've got a job and you're like, I've worked bloody hard this year. I've ticked all the boxes for promotion. Right, can I get my promotion now? And your boss has come to you and said, yep, we're going to give you promotion. However, it turns out that a senator from a different state over the other side of the country has said you can't get your promotion because, and get a load of this, because of some ruling to do with something that you have no control over. Hang on, I have no control over that and I'm being stopped from being promoted because someone else is using me as a political instrument. Yeah, that's exactly what's happening. Yeah, that's exactly what happened. Well, screw him. Screw him. God damn it. Oh, just like I would... in
my opinion, an abuse of the powers we have as senators to say if there's something we vehemently disagree with, that we're going to use that power to hold up the promotion of over 350 men and women in our military.
These are the people who are kicking in doors in Fallujah, shooting terrorists in the face. And we have people saying they're desk jockeys and they're not warriors? That's just ridiculous. It's ridiculous. And it's insulting. The Chinese admirals and their military, they're probably watching this debate right now going, I can't believe my luck. I can't believe our luck. Maybe we should attack Taiwan tomorrow. We're going to look back at this episode and just be stunned at what a national security suicide mission this became.
That's really interesting because all of those are Republicans. It's not me like choosing Democrats to have a go at Republicans. I just find this entirely insane as an idea. And then I talked this morning about Eric Smith, who's had a heart attack. Now, he'd been complaining about working too much because he's like doing two jobs at once because there are no promotions. So he's having to be the acting role as well as his own role. And he's working really hard and then had a heart attack. Tuberville's response to this was that it was something to do. I mean, I have to look this up, but he made the intimations that he is a football coach because that's who Tommy Tuberville was previously. He said, "Well, I was a football coach and I worked harder than that." I was like, "Oh, you don't want to be playing the I work harder than you." So you know, he's just had a heart attack and he's in the military. And I'll tell you what, he's not going to be making friends in the military at Tuberville. Like there's absolutely no doubt about that. It's just incredible. That this is happening, and it just it really does infuriate me. Anyway, moving on to something different. They just did it for fun. Ukrainian survivors detail Wagner Group horrors in Ukraine. The Wagner mercenaries killed Ukrainian POWs and mounted their heads on poles, set them on fire, cut off ears and fingers, says a new report by a human rights group. This goes back to the old question for all those pro-Kremlin voices in the thread. Are you on the right side? Are you really a morally decent person? Is this what you justify? This kind of activity in Ukraine, is that what floats your boat? What does that say about you? And then I just wanted to show this at the end. This is just incredible. So in a mother's first reaction when Russian savages, says Jay in Kyiv, says rained ballistic missiles on the city center of Odessa last night, and her reaction quite nicely is, kids, close your eyes, as she's driving her kids. Russia, now badly losing this war, has nothing left but terrorizing civilian populations with long-range missiles, he says. And this is what happened. So I'll turn the sound down a little bit. Kids, close your eyes, close your eyes. She says, and gets out of Dodge. What a thing to see in the road ahead of you as you're driving from A to B with your family in the car. Just gives us a bit of a reminder about the realities of war, both, you know, what Wagner have been accused of doing, and just the everyday experiences of people living near the front line or living under the threat of missile and drone attacks, which is essentially anyone within the borders of Ukraine. Anyway, thanks for watching. Please like, subscribe and share, and try and keep this in the minds of people who are getting distracted, thinking of other things. It is so important to keep this subject in the public sphere. That's what I'm trying to do. It will be a challenge. People will have war fatigue for perfectly genuine reasons. It's just so important that Ukraine prevail for geopolitical reasons, for moral reasons, and it's really important that we do continue to show our support for them. Anyway, take care, speak soon, and thank you so much to all the members and supporters of this channel. Appreciated.